Hi, and welcome to Tell Me Exactly. I'm your host, Meridith Jensen. Today, I have a very special guest with us. I have the president of Priority Dispatch himself, Brian Dale, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about change management. Hi, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Meredith. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on.
Brian, so tell us a little bit about your experience and why I asked you to come on today.
Oh, boy. Do I remember that conversation from years ago? No. So just my background is I spent 37 years in public safety, 31 of that in the fire service, where I retired as a fire chief from Salt Lake. When I was a captain, I helped oversee the communications center. When I was a deputy chief, the communications center was under my umbrella. And then when I retired, I came over here, and I've been doing quality assurance, accreditation, and other things since I came over here. So in the academy, and then when Ron left, Dr. Clausen asked me to become the president, and everybody's sorry, but here I am.
And that's the happily ever after since, right? So
there you go.
Yeah. So this all started by you and I having a conversation in the hallway about, wanting to bring you on to our podcast to share your wealth of knowledge. And we were kind of having a discussion about this idea of kind of what you wish you knew back then, or what, the things that you didn't know that you wish you knew. And so then that kind of started us talking about change management. So let's get right to it. What do you want to say about change management?
Well, I think my first point on dispatch-related change leadership issue was when I became a new fire captain. They put me from operations into the dispatch and EMS bureau, where I would oversee the case review, feedback, and education of the dispatchers, and then with a project of getting our center accredited, right? And having overseen, I was a paramedic preceptor, I knew that paramedics are not warm and fuzzy, and so when I wrote feedback, it was, you failed to ask key question number 3, and the dispatch code in this case was incorrect based on the answer question.
Right.
And I wasn't warm and fuzzy, I wasn't overly good or bad, it was just that paramedic to paramedic, hey, you missed the IV, your ET2 is 2 meters too deep, whatever the case may be. And I literally had heard that I hated them. That's a direct quote.
Oh, yikes.
And so it was this perception of things had to be done my way, not correct based on a standard, but it had to be done Brian's way, or it had to be done in this way. So my challenge then was to change their perception of the QI process, which then changes their perception of the MPDS protocol, which then hopefully will change their perception of accreditation and everything else. Because what I had heard was this was the project to get me promoted to battalion chief.
That wasn't your goal at all, right? Your goal was to give them feedback to get better.
Yeah, if I'd known what I was going to get into and became a battalion chief, deputy chief, or chief, I probably wouldn't have gone that route. But it was just trying to not be that person that people didn't like. I walked into the center once and I heard this, "He's back." I was like, wow, right? And so we started by having some discussions about why is it necessary for us to go from this to accreditation? What did it get for us? Well, the reason that we were moving this direction because the fire chief wanted us to become accredited so we could reduce the lights and sirens use of the big red heavy trucks in Salt Lake City by at least 40%. So there was the reason for the change and an endpoint for the change. We're going to change, we're going to get accredited, and when we do that, we're going to use the codes better, and we're going to send less lights and siren responses in Salt Lake. So that was the reason for the change and what we would do when we completed the change.
Okay.
And so when we started having those conversations, we created a dispatch review committee. So we started down that road. No need for a QAU because it was just me, right? I was the only Q. So we had a supervisor, a dispatcher, a paramedic, the person running our back end IT, and we had one more. Oh, we had a representative from the police dispatch center, and that was our meeting, right? And we talked about goals where we were. I remember our first report was 54.7% compliant, 19% compliant to post-dispatch instructions, and 23% compliant to pre-arrival instructions.
Wow.
And when that's what our fire chief said.
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't bad people. It was good people who had been ignored for a long time, right?
And maybe not even measured, right?
Right. Well, they weren't measured unless something went wrong, right? The old news is bad news, right? So I had a conversation with one of my good friends who is a supervisor, and if you don't want to know the truth, don't ask her, right? And she said to me, you write to us like you're writing to a paramedic who has all the ego and, they're walking 4 inches off the floor. These are people who have been treated like secretaries and clerks for years, and now we have a captain paramedic telling them all the things they did wrong.
Yeah. So you can imagine that would just come across in the wrong tone, right?
From start to finish, right?
Yeah, especially because you didn't add in the warm and fuzzies as you admitted, right? So
right. So first, of course, you want to be defensive about it. My job is not to be your mother. I didn't say that, but I was thinking it. And so I started thinking about how this could look. And so I started just telling a story. Knowing the end result needs to be accreditation and reduction of lights and sirens, which increases the safety of firefighters and citizens, right? And so I started, during case entry, find that this is a 87-year-old female whose husband says she's having chest pain and difficulty breathing. During case entry, and I would just list the things that were done correctly or well, and things that were errors, right? Mm-hmm. And then I would wrap it up with saying, it's important that we do these things to get the right code because we're looking for the accuracy of the determinant codes to drive a lights and sirens or ALS or BLS or combined responses. And the other thing that I did that wasn't good change management was when I started the DRC, it's my choice. Nobody else is overseeing this. We'd never done it before. And so I got to pick the people that I wanted to be on the committee with me. So who did I pick?
You probably picked the people that were like-minded.
That's exactly what I did. I picked the supervisor, I picked the paramedic, I picked the daytime supervisor and a daytime dispatcher because the meetings were at 9:00 and that made it cool for everyone. And we created policy, procedure, training documents. We started doing a newsletter that was CDE based on the things that were being missed or whatever the case may be. And our compliance was not going up even a little bit. I mean, it was like, what in the heck am I doing wrong? I remember the day I got in my car and I drove 4 blocks from my office to Dr. Clausen's office. I walked in the door and he was sitting there and I kind of slammed it, maybe not intentionally, but there was some emotion there.
Sure.
And I said, you can take this accreditation thing and just shove it because I'm done. I can go back to operations and have many, many more days off and no grief as a captain. And he goes, well, let's talk about it. What are you doing? And I told him the story. And he said, well, who's on the committee? Knowing Dr. Clausen knows all these people because he trained him. And I told him, and he goes, oh, you did the Brian Club. I said, what do you mean? He goes, you don't have one dissenting vote on that committee. And he named off 3 people that were not in the fan club of, structured dispatch call taking. And one of those was a union steward. And he said, you need her on that committee or you will ultimately fail. You've got to have a voice in the room that's dissenting against yours. And, of course, I was thinking, oh, are you serious, dude? So I tried it. And even though every meeting went from 40 minutes to an hour and 40 minutes, with everything had to be justified as to why not, how come. And it was grueling, and I think sometimes intentionally so, right?
Right.
But when we got through it, our compliance jumped about 12% in 1 month. Just from having
fantastic
the 2 other people. So now we're starting to make ground, right? And then I had a supervisor come to me and she said, I've been reading the minutes from the dispatch review committee and I think all the things you guys are doing are good, but I'm really kind of surprised, Brian, that you wouldn't have someone like myself who works graveyards on that committee. And I said, well, why is that? And she says, when I come to work, you're gone. The fire chief's gone. The medical director's gone. The police chief is gone. The building is empty except the dispatchers and crazy people calling us.
Right.
And I don't think my needs, my concerns are being addressed. How do you tell her she's wrong, right?
Right.
So we ended up putting a nighttime, they work 12-hour shifts.
Mm-hmm.
So we put a nighttime dispatcher, nighttime supervisor on the committee. and started addressing some of the things that they were seeing a lot. Like for psych patients, the police departments were keeping the call, and they were just saying it's a psych person. We're like, well, are they injured? Or are they, and we were having some real spicy conversations between the police and fire comm center. And so we brought some cops and some paramedics to the table as well and worked through that, have a policy for it. This is when you go, this is when we go. And they started seeing those things as benefit to them.
That's amazing.
They started seeing the benefits of the committee, the case review, the feedback, all the things you're doing seem to be tied into something, which goes back to Chief Talon's mandate that we get accredited, reduce our lights and sirens, improve our efficiencies. When you're driving an apparatus that gets 2 miles per gallon, you don't want to send them places you don't need to send them to, right? So we got accredited 11 months later, and then that was in November. And January 1, we slowed our use of lights and sirens by about 30%. And all Bravos, we're the first agency in the country, all Bravos got a cold response. That includes unknown motor vehicle accidents. Anything to Bravo was a cold response of the closest apparatus to the scene.
Right.
And we checked that about a year and a half later and saved about 5,830 gallons of fuel. At the time, the price per gallon was about $4.10, and that was only half of our apparatus that we were looking at against. So the end result and the outcome was positive. We also learned through that the dispatchers wanted more involvement in fire operations. So we started sending the supervisors to ISO training, and we started sending a dispatcher and a supervisor to all large drills, especially if it was going to be a live burn. We started including the supervisors in officer training or officer meetings with the fire chief. And those kind of things kind of led to a different, I think, feeling in the comm center from a clerk to a professional, as it were.
Yeah.
And it was the small things. We actually got to a point where we included the dispatchers in our awards banquet every year. We gave them back a uniform we had taken from them many years before that. But they really liked, it didn't have to be a white shirt with gold badges. It just had to be a uniform that they liked wearing.
Right.
So they wore cargos and they wore a golf shirt. But it worked out very well for them. And, they started doing things and bringing things to the table. So when you're looking at it, that's my first foray into making every single possible mistake I could have made as far as managing the change. And also what I took away from that and have started looking at and became a student of change management or change leadership in the years since, whether it be captain in a fire station or administrative chief or assistant chief or deputy or finally the fire chief spot. So when you're looking at it, there's, I think, some basics that you and I both understand we want to come in and communicate to anybody who's listening about this.
Absolutely. So what I want to touch on is one of the points that you just talked about, the change leadership. What is the difference between change management and change leadership, in your opinion?
Oh, boy. How long do we have? I will just say that there are certain projects, I think, that I have seen in my career, at least, that lend themselves more to change management. Something that has a definitive endpoint with a definitive cost and a budget and a definitive method of doing something, right? Like when we built our new public safety building here in Salt Lake. We know what the budget is. We know what it has to house. We know what the parameters are, the size of the building, what it has to do. It has to be net zero. It has to be platinum LEED. And the only thing we need to figure out is how the insides lay out. So the design of the building was very much architect, stakeholder, here's the concrete, here's the color, here's this and here's that. And then when it came to the inside of the building and how we laid things out, the fire and police departments got to lay out their own administrative areas as we saw fit based on our needs. And so that's when we bring all the employees in to say, look, this is your workspace. What do you do here? What makes it more efficient if you're close to this place or that place? Where do you feel like you want to sit next to the window or away from the window? They went through a lot of that stuff with the employees, and the employees were so grateful because change is so scary. You're moving to a new building. It's not going to have air conditioning. You're thinking, oh, my gosh, it's going to be hot in there or cold in there. And by getting them involved early and keeping them involved and listening to what their concerns were, I think we're able to get through that. So change management is more constructive. It's within a box, right?
Yeah, it's kind of finite.
Yeah, it is. There's not that much variables that can occur within that type of a change process. Change leadership in a very short way to thinking about it is, number one is get the right people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is tell them where the endpoint has to be. We're going to be accredited. We're going to do this. We're going to have this change. We're going to lay out the floor differently, whatever the case may be. And tell them why. People can get behind things if they understand why you're doing it, not just because I don't like it. I like blue better than gold. I mean, those are just ridiculous things that people find a reason to hate. What is the problem? What is the urgency getting it fixed? And what are you trying to solve? If you've got a definitive thing you're trying to solve, then it makes change more, not easy, but it makes it more agreeable, right? When we were talking about our process and how we would manage what goes on what type of call, the dispatchers got very concerned because we're going to have fire captains complaining about whatever. And so to manage that, we have quarterly captains meeting. We went out there and told them what was going to change, why it was going to change. The fire chief, the medical director were on board with the change, and the dispatchers are doing things per policy by the protocols and the standards that we expect. And we got some grumbling, but not much. I was actually impressed with how it turned out. So you've created the sense of urgency. You know why you're doing it. You've got the right people in the room, and part of it is providing whatever parameters that they have to abide by, timeline, finance, whatever the case may be. And then my favorite part of that is get out of the way.
So tell me what you mean by that, getting out of the way.
Getting out of the way is, when I was the fire chief, 5 bugles on my collar, when you walk into a room, you change the dynamics. Things get very formal, very nice, and that's not what you're looking for, right? Get out of the way means let the process work. You've got the right people, you've got the parameters, you've told them where we have to be and why we have to be there. How they get there needs to be that group dynamic, the storming, norming, performing thing, right?
Right.
And it was interesting to see how that process worked. It was also interesting to see how messy it got. They slapping the table and pointing fingers, and that seems to die down, and you find that equilibrium in the middle somewhere, maybe one side or the other. But it is something that when it's a large thing where it's going to impact the entire group or most of the group or your group and somebody else's group, getting out of the way is simply putting trust in the people you put in the room.
Yeah, I like that. So you've built the foundation, you've told them what the parameters are, but then trusting based on the fact that you have the right people in the room, trusting that they are going to get to the solutions that are needed. Might not be the exact way that you would do it, but it's still going to be the way that it needs to get done and the way that everyone has ownership in now. Right? Yeah, I like that.
Right. One of John Carter's bits that he talks about is embrace the messiness of change. And I think that that's one of those things where if you walk in and expect it to be a very ruly and ordered, I would think we want to go this way. You could have a bunch of type A personalities in the room who are not afraid of voicing their opinion. You have to expect that. As long as it's professional and not demeaning, you can disagree all day. But I think that's one of those powerful tools that you can use where everybody had a say. The union was involved. The firefighters were involved. This person was involved. Medical director was involved. And that way everybody's view is expressed. And sometimes you might have to have a final say. In the fire service, that usually goes to the fire chief. But I only had to do that once. And all the times I used it, even for smaller projects, it was interesting to see how much they engaged, and the employee group felt better because they felt that their voice was heard.
Right. So one of the things that you spoke about that I want to also kind of go back to a little bit is the idea that change management requires a bit of self-awareness on the part of the leadership, right? So the change leaders have to be able to admit that their way isn't the only way. You kind of started out with your introduction even speaking about that. And so talk about some of the things that, again, going back to what you wish you would have known, what are some of the things that you've seen people do all the time that are just doomed to fail when it comes to leadership and change leadership?
I think for me, another one of John Carter's quotes was, "You have to speak to where the employees are listening." So what do they need to hear from you? What are they looking for? What are the rules? What are the areas of engagement where they can put their hand up and say pause, or I need to talk about this? It can't just be from the leader's perspective, in my opinion, with some of the worst words you can use as a manager or leader.
Right.
But not trying to influence, but it's trying to guide and let people know that, you're listening to them. You hear what they're listening for. I want to hear from you that, we're going to work through this, and I do have a voice, and the people that I represent or the people I work with have a voice. And I think sometimes leaders forget that because they feel like they always have to be in charge. It's their thing. They're the boss. And I just think that's one of the worst approaches you can take. Everybody knows you're the boss. You've got the title
Right.
to prove that. But do you have the empathy and the self-awareness to be, if you will, reflective, or self-reflective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are you listening to what their concerns are? Because, boy, I'll tell you what, I've never been in a project where I didn't know exactly how to do it
Right.
until I heard other people's opinion. Then it was like, oh, yeah, hadn't thought about that. And some people are just not introspective enough to see that side of this whole thing with change.
Okay. And so then now let's talk about some leaders that you have learned from or that you try to emulate. You spoke about John Carter. Is there any others that you've kind of seen do it the right way that you would kind of follow?
Well, yeah. Yeah, and I think every person you meet, every person that you work with or work for will teach you something.
Yeah.
Some people teach you what to do. Others teach you, oh, I don't want to do that. Or maybe I do that, and that doesn't look good, right? One of the fire chiefs I worked for in my younger career, Pete Peterson, he was famous for guiding the conversation by asking questions and not making demands or, inappropriate comments or, pushing you one way or the other. He would say things like, interesting, tell me more about that.
Right.
Where did that idea come from? Why do you think that's better? And one thing I came to realize is that he was maintaining, if you will, control or guiding the conversation, but not by saying we're going over there, but guiding it by asking questions that would make the person who's speaking more reflective of their comments and why and how that works and other drawbacks to your approach or whatever the case may be. And I've always remembered that, ask a question, don't make a comment if you're trying to guide or lead. I firmly believe to get out of people's way. When I was the fire chief, I have 21 chief officers, and I think they're all very, very competent. So the worst thing that I could do as a leader is to tell them how to do something.
Right.
That's not what they need, right? If I have concern, I certainly can bring that up by asking a question. Why is this way better than something else you've looked at? Or how did you come to that conclusion that this is the best way to approach this? And again, trying to get them to think about their actions and think about how they're managing this is a strong way of doing it. And I never saw him lose his temper or become agitated in a group setting where other people are watching this guy with 5 bugles on his collar. He was always calm, and he wasn't afraid to say, I need to think about this conversation a little bit. Let's meet next week, and we'll pick this up. And that always told me that he was getting frustrated and didn't want to show that. So he would just, kind of walk away from the conversation enough to bring some distance, right?
Yeah.
What's the old saying? With distance brings clarity.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not so emotionally in the moment. And I think just kind of watching his persona, how he trusted the people below him and didn't feel the need to be in every meeting. He would give a direction to his chief officers, and he would not go any farther.
Mm-hmm.
If they asked him to attend, he would. But if not, it was their ball. If they could ask for help, but I'm not going to mandate it. I'm not going to push it on you. And I always respected him for that.
Okay.
I also think you have to remember the people that you've worked with or worked for that maybe were not the best change management leaders or whatever the case may be. I worked for a captain who my paramedic partner and I would sit out in the bay like we were checking our equipment waiting for the captain to get to work. And he would either be high and tight with his hair in a tight ponytail and his most pressed shirt. And it's like, oh boy, Cap's mad. He's going to make us train. He's going to make us do all sorts of stuff today. Or he'd come in on his motorcycle, hair flowing in the breeze. Oh, today's going to be a good day because Mike's in a good mood. You never want that as a leader or a change leader. Your emotion drives your decision-making process or how you're going to manage something. And I always remembered, don't be that person. Try to be more level with your approach to things, not having to always be right, and being able to accept that other values or other suggestions or ideas have every bit as much as value or impact as the ones that you have.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really love about your leadership style is the openness to other opinions, other ideas, other solutions. I think that that's what makes you one of the strongest leaders that we have in our organization.
I think anybody that's been around as long as I have has probably made all those mistakes early in their
Yeah,
career.
of course.
So hopefully we don't repeat them, right?
Right.
I think the one thing that I've learned from my education and my experience is that the leaders that you talk to who are unsuccessful, someone who when we did a public bond for the first public safety building here in Salt Lake, we had a group of leaders that were working on it, and they were told by the city council that price tag probably won't fly with voters. That's just too much. It's too high. And come to find out, it didn't only involve a new public safety building for police, fire, admin, EOC, and dispatch, but it also included a fire training center and a DNA lab and evidence lab for the police department. And they pushed it through. They kept on working on it, and the public said no. So they weren't listening to concerns.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't listening to questions. They weren't listening to what people who were in the trenches, as it were, telling them what was going on. And they also kind of failed to define what success meant. At the end of this project, what will we have completed? Well, we'll have a new public safety building and a new training center for the fire department and a new evidence lab for police. All right, could that improve the response time for fires? Could it improve the success rate for, like they had a 3-month backup for rape kits as an example, right? So could that change impact the time at which to take or get those rape kits successfully evaluated and processed, right?
Right.
So those are some things I think leaders do, and I think sometimes it comes from people who think way too much of their title.
Sure.
And I think sometimes you're just trying to get to the end point, time, and they're not hearing what people are telling them. We've all done that in our career.
Yeah.
We've all of us have done that. But your day-to-day operation should be to not push time before process. The process should define the time, not the other way around.
Right.
And listen to people who are involved or will be impacted, and they have questions or concerns.
So one thing I want to ask you about change management, because this is something that I think we run into a lot when we are implementing our products and services at agencies for the first time. What about agencies that try to change too much all at the same time or too quickly back to back to back?
Yeah.
What have you learned there that you wish you knew? Yeah.
Well, some of it is organizational maturity, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, oh boy, here it goes with another bad story that I did. I was involved with a group of leaders that pushed a new CAD, a new phone system, and a new version of ProQA, which is ProQA Police, on our dispatchers in a 4-month period of time. Within 4 months, all that stuff was initiated. Phones, CAD, and ProQA Police.
How many people quit during that 4 months?
About 77,000. But
yeah.
It was the most frustrating thing I've gone through. And one of the dispatchers, who is not necessarily a fan of mine, but she was being honest with me. She said, so when you're in your closed door meetings, how many dispatchers were in the room?
Right.
And I said, well, I was a dispatcher in 1983.
That should count for something.
Yeah, that count for nothing? Yeah, that's right. And it was just one of those things where the presiding theory was this. It will be a pain in the butt, and it will be frustrating, and it will be what it is for a short period of time, and then we're done with it.
Mm-hmm.
New radio, new CAD, new ProQA version of police that everybody's going to have to learn. And we'll get it over in 3 or 4 months, and then it'll be done. It'll be past history, and no one will care.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, that's one way to look at it. And you know
off
what?
The Band-Aid, yeah.
Yeah, I know all the euphemisms, right? But hindsight, I get it. But even the dispatchers later on were saying that they felt that they just needed a couple of more months, maybe 6 months for all three of those things. And the other thing was, on the police side, they also changed the record management system for the police officers, right? So the cops were calling in wondering how to do a 28 or 29 check on their MDC because it was a different UI than the one they were used to before.
Right.
So, and I don't think anybody on the committee, certainly not me because I'm not a police officer, had remembered or thought that the cops were also, street officers were also going through a learning curve with the new RMS.
Right.
I think other things that, that I have done, I think I wouldn't do it that way again, are things that impacted dispatch. Like we were doing operational things that would impact dispatch. We were going to add this, we call a resource engine to a structure fire. So in Salt Lake, the normal response is 3 engines, truck, chief, and an ambulance. And we added another engine for any confirmed fire. That was a term in our industry at the time called a resource engine. They could be turning off power. They could be working with the medical sector. They could be doing any number of things. It's just more bodies on the scene to alleviate some of the stress.
Yeah.
But we didn't do it. We didn't think to tell dispatch what that meant. If the chief officer asked for a resource engine on any scene, what does that mean? What they didn't understand was we wanted them no lights and no siren. You're just you're just giving us a hand. You're not going inside. You're not doing any critical stuff. We're just going to keep some more bodies on the scene. And dispatch is like, what are you talking about? They didn't understand because we didn't tell them. Anytime you do that, it makes people feel so bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's amazing to me. Sometimes when you have a change that you have to implement that, it's just a directive or it's just the project that we have to implement, just allowing all the groups involved to have a voice. You spoke about that multiple times throughout this session today, how important that is. Even if you can't, make everyone happy, giving everyone a voice is going to be the biggest chance for success. So,
yep.
I love that.
I also think that, and that doesn't have to be a leader. It could be an instructor works with us. It could be a supervisor. It could be a full-time Q. They have to understand the seat that these people work in.
Right. And
even though I have been a dispatcher since 1983, I did go through CAD training for the fire department so I could run a CAD. When I was a deputy chief, it was my responsibility to go to the comm center to talk to the mayor and manage the limited resources we would have on a major alarm fire. And so I got very comfortable knowing those people and knowing what they were doing and understood the frustrations that they had.
Right.
Including some of the things they felt that they, quote, had to do in Pro QA. I mean, I understand some of that because they don't have all of the information and sometimes it doesn't make sense in their environment.
Right.
Why am I doing a stroke tool and we don't have a stroke center here? They're going to ABC Hospital, which is the only hospital we have in town. I'm spending another 67 seconds doing a stroke diagnostic tool. For what reason? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, helping them understand what the value is, I think, is an important aspect of that, getting them to change their mind about the process.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did after we got accredited as a kind of a thank you to the dispatchers is every year we sent 3 dispatchers and supervisors based on their compliance levels to Navigator at our cost, right?
Right.
So the fire department EMS division paid for that out of our EMS grant funding, and every year we got the same thing: 3 dispatchers and a supervisor based on. And if the same person went more than 2 years in a row, which did happen, by the way,
sure,
we would just go to the next person in line. So not
in
number
compliance,
1, but number 2. Right. So those are the kind of things, as an end result, and you made it, what is the value for you?
Right.
The value for you is we're doing the right thing. We're impacting the citizens. We're going to help you become even more professional than you already are. And it's also the small things that people do in change management. I mean, I bought more pizzas during that process than I could ever, because we would do, I would just stop by with a couple of pizzas or, pizzas and salads or whatever. After every quarter, we would have a shift. We had 4 shifts back then.
Yeah.
And I would just drop by pizzas or something, for as a thank you to the shift that had the highest compliance. And those things start making a difference over time.
Yeah.
They really do impact the dispatchers. And I will tell you one quick story.
Yeah. I
was thinking about how I could make the transfer of that physical piece of paper I'm holding in my hand from my hand to your hand not be so scary. And, this goes back so far. If you remember a software called CorelDRAW, it was a graphic program. You were probably 7 when it went out of business. But anyway, I created this atta girl, atta boy poster.
I love it.
And it said, hey, we're on fire now. Thanks for burning up the compliance chart. And I would give their name, their compliance, the type of call it was, a couple of sentences, and then thanks for all you do. And I would sign it. And the first, we laminated the first ones too.
Of course.
That was a bad mistake. Anyway, I gave it to the dispatcher at the beginning of their shift during will call. And the first one was Lisa Burnett, Lisa Obhikins at the time, and one of the best dispatchers I've ever met in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because gave it to her, and she's like, "Oh, thanks, I guess." Didn't quite sure.
She wasn't
and everybody's like, "Hey,
it, right?"
Yeah, no. Well, no one was because it was the first one. But people would, as she would walk out, "Hey, you got some brown stuff on your nose, Lisa, you may want to work that away." And I am not kidding when I say this. We had a 17% increase in compliance in 1 month.
Yeah.
Even though they were harassing her.
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, heck, I'm better than her. I'm going to be so on and so forth, right? But when you're talking about change, there was a survey done a couple years ago, I think it was 2022, from Gartner. 74% of employees were willing to support organizational change in 2016. So today, 2 years ago, 38% would say the same thing.
Wow.
Only 38% of employees support change. And again, it goes back to those three things: communication, collaboration, and commitment, right? Commit to the end result. Collaboration, everybody has a voice. And communicate early, communicate often, communicate always.
I love it. Those 3 takeaways for those that are listening for change management. What if you could just give them 3 takeaways?
Well, I think it goes back to the printed 3 C's, right?
Yep.
So what communication is like? What needs to change? Why are we doing this? Is it for a resume for me? Is it going to improve your working conditions? Is it going to improve or reduce your stress? Is it going to impact the citizens we work with? And then when in doubt, communicate some more.
Mm-hmm.
What's the end result? Why are we doing this? Where are we going? Is there a timeline? Is there a budget? What are the parameters? What's the box that we're working inside of?
Yeah.
Secondly,
we never hear people complain about too much communication. It's always the opposite, that we don't get enough.
I agree. Second is collaboration. I think a lot of times we miss having the right person in the room.
Yep.
I went to a state APCO NINA meeting, and I was presenting Protocol 41 for a caller in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And the state or the state was there talking about the 988 initiative that they were implementing in July. And they were talking about all these things that they wanted. The dispatch system had to give the end result of what happened to the patient after they transferred to 988. What? Anyway,
what?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Anyway, there are some parameters here, and this woman in a couple of rows in front of me, you can just see her seething. I'm like, she's going to blow up. And she finally raised her hand, and the woman, who was very nice, she was very articulate from the state. I was very impressed with her because you could tell she knew she wasn't going to be well received, right? Because you're adding a significant amount of workflow. And she says, "I just have one question." Yeah, what is it? How many dispatchers or dispatch managers were in the room when you were making these darn rules? And she looked behind her for a couple of people, and she looked to her side, to her assistant, whisper, "Yeah, I'm really sorry to say there were none."
That's how you end up with things like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can just imagine all the point of failures that their policy would create without having a person from the dispatch center saying, "Well, that's not possible. We can't do that."
Right.
Unless you make manual phone calls. There's no automation here that we can take care of. And that's that collaboration piece, is just making sure everybody's in the room. And then I think the other one, and again, could write many texts, but is just commitment.
Mm-hmm.
If the leader or the manager involved in the project is not committed to the end result, then why should anybody else be?
Right.
And you and I have seen how many times when we implement in an agency and the fire chief or the police chief or the medical director is not a fan. They don't believe in the system. They don't understand the value of structured call taking and all the advancements that our system offers. And I think any one of those things that's not paid attention to can cause failure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, for me as a leader, what I try to do is put the right people in the room, give them as many clear directions as I can, and then just get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
Let people who you're paying to do these things, or a subject matter expert, or they have the skill set, if it's finance, if it's legal, whatever it is, and then just step out of the room. I'm here if you need me. Good luck.
Fantastic. I love it. Brian, thank you so much for coming on today. I always learn something every time we have a discussion, and that will just continue. So I hope you'll come back and join us again. We'll have to come up with another fun topic.
Yeah, who would think that change management or change leadership would be a fun topic? But you and I can make anything fun.
Absolutely. Meredith. We always can make it fun. Well, thanks again for joining us. We'll have you back again. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to let us know what you liked, and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Look for @TellMeExactly to get the latest on all things emergency communications. Tell Me Exactly is a Priority Dispatch Corporation podcast developed by our team of protocol experts and hosted by me, Meridith Jensen, with Cody Ekman as producer, Reading Roberts as sound engineer, Scott Robinson and Jason Barber as executive producers.